to Nobody Told Me. I'm Laura Owens.
And I'm Jan Black. It is a joy to welcome our guest on this episode, Ingrid Fetell Lee. Ingrid is the author of a wonderful new book called Joyful: The Surprising Power of Ordinary Things to Create Extraordinary Happiness.
Ingrid, welcome to the show. We are so excited to talk to you today about the idea of joy.
I'm so excited to be here.
Talk to us a little bit about how you became interested in the concept of joy.
Well, it happened by accident, really. I was studying design. I was in my first year of graduate school in design, and I was at my first year-end review. And this is, you can picture the scene. I'm standing in a room, I have a table, and I have all the things that I've made over the course of the year laid out on that table. And this panel of professors standing in front of me, and they sort of just look at my work for a while, and they don't say anything. And then one of them says, "Your work gives me a feeling of joy." And that was for me, it sort of hit me in such a strange way, because I thought, I'd spent most of my life hearing that joy was something that comes from within. And so for someone to say that I had made something that made them feel a sense of joy, it confused me. And so I asked the professors, how do things create joy? If joy is this intangible and amorphous feeling, how do things produce that feeling in us? And they kind of hemmed and hawed, and they couldn't really answer the question. And so that sort of sent me off on my own exploratory journey to see if I could answer it for myself.
And what did you find, and how did this book come about?
Yeah, good question. So I set off, one of the first things that I did was I just started asking people about the things that brought them joy. I thought, okay, if things can bring joy, then why don't I just start to understand what are some of the things that do bring people joy? And I did this with people I knew and also with complete strangers. I stood in Rockefeller Center and just sort of grabbed tourists and people on their lunch breaks and just started asking people about the things that brought them joy. And one of the things that I noticed was that though many of those things can be personal and based on your own personal experience, many of them are actually common. And I would start to hear the same things coming up again and again and again. And so that would be things like hot air balloons and bubbles and rainbows and confetti but big open meadows, that you can have a picnic in. And as I started to look at these places and things, I realized that there were a set of universal things that produce this feeling of joy. And so with that universal set of things, that's interesting and useful to know. But as a designer, what I really wanted to know is, what is it about these things? Why these specific things? And so I would put pictures of them up on my studio wall. And every day I would come in and sort of just look at them and just see if I could make sense of it. And then one day I noticed that there were certain patterns, there were certain visual or sensorial patterns to the things that people were telling me brought them joy over and over again. And they were things like pops of bright color or round shapes or symmetry. There was a lot of symmetrical objects, or a sense of lightness and elevation. And as I looked at those patterns, I realized that there was something physical connecting to this feeling of joy, that even though the feeling itself is intangible, we can connect to it through physical attributes. And that is the root of this book.
I want to ask a really basic, maybe a little bit silly question here. How is joy different than happiness? Because you hear people use those terms almost interchangeably, but I feel like they are different things.
Great question. Actually, not a silly question at all. And you're right that they do get used interchangeably. And even sometimes in the scientific community, the words joy and happiness and positivity kind of get mixed up in people's minds. But scientists do actually have a distinction between these two terms. And happiness is generally thought of as something that we understand over time. It's more of a a broader look at how we feel about our lives. So it includes things like, how fulfilled we are at work, and whether we feel we have a sense of purpose, and how connected we are, and how the quality of our relationships. All of those things go into assessing whether we feel happy. And what's interesting about happiness is we don't even always know whether we're happy, because it is kind of a big and complex thing. But joy is much more about how we feel in a moment. Joy is an emotion, so it's a physical and mental response to the circumstances of a particular moment. And so the definition I use is it's an intense momentary experience of positive emotion, one that makes us smile and laugh and feel like we want to jump up and down. So that is something that is much easier to measure because we always know when we're feeling a moment of joy.
And what do we need to do to find more joy in our lives? How can we work this into our lives?
I think that, so we've often been taught that to find joy, we need to look within ourselves. But I think that really finding more joy is about turning out into the world and connecting deeply with the experiences that are around us. And so, often that means, just really being immersed in, what you're doing at the moment. I have a practice that I like to do called joy spotting. And it's really about going out into the world and just tuning your eye to the joyful things that are around you. And you can use some of those things that I mentioned, things like pops of bright color, round shapes, a sense of abundance or multiplicity. You can use some of those things as guidelines to look for when you're sort of out there joy spotting, looking for the kinds of things that might bring you joy.
And if you're joy spotting, why is it that if you see more of something, it makes you more joyful? So you wouldn't be quite as excited and joyful if you were to see one hot air balloon, but if you saw 200 in New Mexico, it's going to make you very, very joyful.
Yeah, it's interesting how that happens. So this is what I call the principle of abundance. And I think that it is connected in some primal way to our ancestors' drive to find places that felt sustaining and like rich sources of life. And so if you look at, research on the types of habitats that people prefer, people tend to prefer more lush habitats, lush grasslands and lush forests than sort of dry desert-like places. And, part of the reason for that might be a kind of evolutionary inheritance that we gravitate towards places that feel, richly textured and brightly colored and full of a sort of an abundance of sensations because they suggest that they're going to be able to sustain life.
Abundance is one of the 10 aesthetics of joy that you've identified. Another one is freedom. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so freedom is something that is nearly always joyful. You can think about, kids bursting out the school doors on the last day of school, or what it's like to ride in a convertible, or the difference between having a dinner in a stuffy, formal room versus being able to have it outside on plein air. So freedom is a feeling that's often associated with joy, and it's associated with joy metaphorically too, right? We celebrate our freedom as a nation every year with fireworks. It's a big, it's a big celebration because freedom is such an essential quality to the feeling of joy. And part of the reason is that, of course, freedom is the thing that allows us to pursue everything else that gives us joy in life.
Why is it that adults feel the need to hide some of their genuine joy?
It's a great question. And I think that it has a lot to do with a sort of deeper bias in our culture against joyfulness and toward sort of coolness or seriousness. We tend to think that, pursuing success and being, focused and serious is what is going to bring us happiness. And in the process, we kind of feel like we have to rein in our joy and suppress it. And so people are often told that they especially women can't wear bright colors because that might make them look unserious. And that we should really, tone down our playful impulses so that we, look more professional. And yet the irony is that, those joyful things are so often, what connect us to others, what help us come up with new ideas. So, by sort of suppressing our joy, we actually inhibit our success rather than promote it.
Another one of the aesthetics of joy that you identified is harmony. Explain more about that.
So harmony is the aesthetic of order and balance and symmetry. And it's interesting because you might think, freedom is the aesthetic of sort of letting loose and being wild and free. And then you have harmony, which sort of seems like it might be in tension with that. Harmony is all about order. But in fact, I think they work really well together, that, we have a love of freedom, but we also have a love of structure that helps, our brains make sense of the world. And so we love symmetrical shapes. Symmetrical shapes, our brains detect them in less than 100 milliseconds. It's one of the fastest things that we detect about an object is whether it's symmetrical or not. We love to see things that are perfectly balanced, and we love things that are organized neatly. So when we see an arrangement of objects and they sort of have, whether they're color-coded, if you see a color-coded bookshelf, that's always a popular thing to see on Instagram, or you see objects that are sort of neatly arranged in a grid. These are things that you can actually do, in your own home very simply to create a feeling of joy. It sort of taps into this innate longing for symmetry that helps us make sense of the world.
And I feel like when I'm trying to work, it's so much better if things are organized and I feel that sense of harmony. But I'm curious to know what other advice you would have for trying to cultivate joy in our work environment, even if that environment itself on the surface wouldn't create that emotion.
Yeah, I think that's it's one of the questions I get asked most frequently is how do I create more joy in my workspace? Because I think it's a place where people are really longing to feel more joy. One of the things that I always say is add plants. So add greenery to your workspace. There's a lot of research on the way that nature, which again is part of the freedom aesthetic, that nature affects our ability to concentrate and ability to focus. And even, it doesn't need to be a lot. Studies show that even just adding a few plants to a windowless room can actually decrease blood pressure, increase attention and concentration, and also even increase people's generosity toward each other. So these things seem on the surface like they might just be sort of superficial add-ons, but they actually have profound effects on our behavior and emotions. Another thing that this one might be sort of counterintuitive in a workspace, but adding something cute. It sounds kind of silly, but research in Japan has shown that when people look at pictures of cute things, like baby animals, for example, something happens in our brains where we become more focused. And one of the reasons is that, cuteness is a set of aesthetic signals, big eyes and round faces. Those features unlock a kind of nurturing impulse within us. And nurturing is a very focused and detail-oriented type of task. And so the speculation, these researchers in Japan speculate that that having something cute, that actually looking at something cute makes us more focused and detail oriented. So I think never feel guilty about your otter video break or whatever form of cuteness you like to inject into your workday. And if there's something cute you want to keep on your desk, like a bobblehead doll or, whatever it is, I put googly eyes on my stapler. And I put googly eyes on things on my desk because, it's playful, it's fun. And, if this research is accurate, then it might help me, catch errors on my expense reports too.
Along those lines, what would you do to bring joy to a child's environment?
Great question. I think in a kid's environment, children's brains are, I'm not a child psychologist, so I'll preface that by saying this, but I do think that, children naturally seek out sensations as part of their development, and that the brain, develops in concert with its surroundings. And so making sure that there is an abundance of sensations and different kinds of sensations that kids can gravitate towards on their own feels like an important feature of a children's environment.
You were quoted in an article for the Huffington Post as saying that awe is good for perspective shifting. How can we incorporate the idea of awe into the design of our office and our homes?
Awe is a tricky one, because awe is something that is a powerful emotion. And research shows that it can have really profound effects, certainly on shifting our perspective. One of the reasons for that is that awe tends to make our sense of self feel smaller. And actually in a good way. So this feeling of having a small self actually makes us feel more connected to other people and more connected to other, creatures in the universe. Doing that at home can be challenging because, you often don't have the vastness of space that you need generally to create awe. I think in offices, awe can, really, there's a place in offices that is often under leveraged, and I think that's the lobby. That many office buildings, the lobby is sort of a place you pass through as opposed to a place where you linger, and yet usually that's the place that has the sort of vastest proportions. Another place, obviously, is getting some elevation. So if you can get to, if your office has an accessible roof, or you have even just, a few flights of stairs that you can go up and you can sort of take your body up in space. Those are great ways to create a feeling of awe.
What about joy in an older person's life? What would you do to create an environment for an older person, or perhaps for someone who was very sick or grieving? What would you do to bring joy to them?
Well, I think there's a few things. One is that, as we age, our senses decline in acuity, right? And so, as we age, the amount of light entering the eye decreases, sometimes by up to 80% by the time we're in our 70s. We're not seeing color as richly as we might before. Hearing declines. And so it's really important, I think, to keep people connected to the sensory world and to provide things that may be a little bit brighter or a little bit, bolder than we might think, designing from a younger perspective. So making sure that, those sensations are available and are rich in their depth. I interviewed a woman named Hilary Dahl who works to design nursing homes in the UK. And one of the things that she said in her research was that residents of nursing homes often ask for the brightest colors to be placed in their bedrooms, not in the common areas where you would expect, because that is the place where they're spending the most time, and they're sort of craving that boldness. For someone who is unwell, I think certainly flowers is a simple thing you can do, but it actually can have a real power. The nurse Florence Nightingale noticed this, even all the way back in 1860. And she observed that patients, would be in decline, and then a delivery of flowers would just perk them up. And that, variety and color are really important to someone who is ill. In any of these situations where someone has limited mobility, either they're unwell or they're older and they don't have as much ability to sort of get around in the world, being able to bring that color and that joy to them can be a really important way to sort of lift their spirits. And you mentioned grieving, and I think it's a really important point to remember that joy is something that's available to us all the time. So when you are in a period of grieving, you're not going to be happy. That's understandable. But small moments of joy, bringing something that makes someone laugh, bringing, again, a bunch of flowers or something brightly colored that can sort of lift their spirits. These are things that you can do for someone who is grieving, and that can sort of take them momentarily out of their pain and their sorrow, and, remind them that you're there for them, that others are there for them, and that there are joys to look forward to in life.
I'm in my 20s and I feel like I have a very poor sense of design. And so I thought your book was especially interesting because I realized there are a lot of changes that I could make myself. And I'm wondering, what is one piece that everyone should have in every room of their house to create joy? You already mentioned plants and some cute objects, but I'm wondering what else I might include.
Sure. I just want to say one thing first, which is that I think this is a mentality that we've been sort of given around design, which is that you can be bad or good at it. And actually, what I hope to reframe for people is that it's not about being bad or good. It's about being able to tune into your own joy and finding ways to bring that into your home. That it's less about sort of abstract standards of taste and more about you being able to feel what feels good to you in your home and incorporating that. I think every room will be different, but certainly things that you can do that I would recommend. I would recommend having pops of color. You don't have to have a circus colored home. That's not what this is about. But having small pops of bright color, brightness is universally associated with joy. And we do it even in our language, right? We say, we can look on the bright side. Brightness is certainly associated with joy, and just having a pop of a bright color. And it doesn't have to be any specific color either. It can be any color that brings you joy. So having a pop of color would be one. I think introducing pattern. Pattern is a really, geometric or repeating patterns are a way to bring that harmony aesthetic into a space. Another thing you can do is having little surprises. So one of the things I love to do is paint the insides of drawers with a bright color. In my home, we painted the inside of one of the closets with cabana stripes. So when you open the closet, there's, a little pop of joy back there. So it's fun to have things that, aren't necessarily out all the time, but are little reminders of joy. You can also do that with drawers or with a bathroom, a small bathroom that you open, maybe you only go in there every so often, but it's there for you.
You urge people to keep a joy journal, which I found fascinating. Explain more about that and what should be in your joy journal.
Sure. So I think one of the things, when I look at what are the reasons why people are having trouble accessing joy in daily life, one of the reasons is, we talked about judgment before, that having had so much judgment around joy and having this feeling like we have to put it aside when we get older, we can start to lose touch with it. And sometimes I talk to people and they say, I don't even know what brings me joy anymore. So keeping a joy journal is a really great way to start to get back in touch with what brings you joy, because joy is a visceral response. You can actually start to notice, when I'm walking around town, where are the moments that I smile? What are the moments when I'm laughing? When do I say, wow? And of course, wow is always also a cue that you might be feeling awe. So noticing those feelings, and then noticing the physical circumstances of that. So where are you? What's around you? What are the sensations that you're experiencing? Who are you with? It can start to help you, connect back into your joy.
Talk to us about why we should replace "how was your day" with "what was the silliest part of your day," and how will that therefore lead to more joyful days?
I'm so glad you asked me this.
I thought it was fascinating.
This came from a 5-year-old. And so that's what makes it so great, is that I have a really good friend, good friends, and their daughter started asking them this when they would get home from work. What was the silliest part of your day? And what they realized as they were having this discussion night after night with their daughter was that even things that seemed, not so great about their day. So, my friend talked about how she got on the subway and, she was stressed about an email, so she missed her stop. And when she had to come up with something silly that happened in her day, that was the thing that occurred to her. And suddenly she realized how silly it was that she was so stressed out about this email that she completely missed her subway stop. So, doing that can start to reframe, the things that maybe go wrong in your day, and actually start to help you think about, what was actually sort of joyful or silly about it. And it can also help you start to tune in, if you're thinking about that question at the end of every day, it sort of primes you to look for the silly in the world. And the more that we, reframe our lens to look for joy and look for, silliness and lightheartedness in the world, the more we'll see it.
Ingrid, since our show is called Nobody Told Me, we always ask our guests, what's your nobody told me lesson? What is it that nobody could have told you about joy, or what surprised you about learning about joy?
I would say nobody told me that the physical world could be a reservoir of positivity that I could turn to. Nobody told me that joy is all around us. And if they had, I think that it would have been easier for me in certain moments where, I struggled with anxiety and struggled with, feeling like my life wasn't necessarily going in the right direction. If I had known that instead of sort of searching and scouring inside myself for the problem, maybe sometimes there isn't a problem with me, and maybe the solution is actually to look around and start to connect more deeply with what's around me.
And talk to us a little bit about that hashtag that you've created, joy spotting, or hashtag joy spotting.
Yeah, joy spotting. So, this is out there on social media. It's probably most active on Instagram, and it's a way for people to share things that bring them joy with others. So I'd encourage you, if you're listening, to please share something that brings you joy on Joy Spotting. Research shows that when we share joy with others and they respond to it, it gives us a sense that those people will also be there for us when times are hard. So by sharing joy with each other, we start to build relationships and deepen relationships. They'll be there for us in tough times as well. So, having more joy spotting out in the world, I think is a way to sort of use those social platforms to sort of facilitate this deepening of relationships and this sharing of joy.
And Ingrid, how else can people connect with you on social media?
You can find me at Aesthetics of Joy on Instagram. On Twitter, I'm at Ingrid Fetell. And of course, my website is aestheticsofjoy.com.
Well, Ingrid, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And again, Ingrid Fetell, her book is Joyful, The Surprising Power of Ordinary Things to Create Extraordinary Happiness. You're listening to Nobody Told Me. I'm Laura Owens.
And I'm Jan Black.
Thank you so much for joining us.